everybody here again. This was a very popular event, which I think is great. It's a good way to connect with y'all and for all of us to be able to kind of get together in an unusual way these days, but still enjoyable. And I certainly enjoy reading the stories, and I appreciate that y'all want me to read the stories and you enjoy them as well. So the story tonight is about a pair of ducks. So I will get started. You could probably ask anyone who works as an intern, volunteer, or staff member at Wildlife Rescue, and they would all tell you there are no dull moments here. If anything, we offer our fine, hardworking people plenty of excitement, and all in the name of saving animals. What could be a better way to make a living? The excitement started one day when we received a call about some domesticated ducks who were doing their best to carry out a peaceful life on a suburban park pond. Sadly, there was some individual in this same suburb who had other ideas for these peace-loving water birds. A concerned caller told us that they had seen two ducks who had arrows piercing their necks and their heads, but the ducks were somehow managing to survive. Staff member at that time during those years ago, Rob Koger, went to the rescue of the troubled fowl to see if he could capture the birds and bring them to the sanctuary for help. Rob arrived the late afternoon and found that there was a construction fence surrounding the pond, but that a section of the fencing had been torn away, so people were coming and going. There were well over 36 Pekin, Muscovy, and Muscovy mallard cross ducks living on this mid-sized lake, and most were ready to settle in for the evening. As he surveyed the area, Rob noticed that about 100 yards from him was a small, quiet gathering of feathered friends, and there in the midst of these was one of the wounded birds. With net in hand, Rob ever so slowly approached the resting yet agile ducks and gently captured and carefully placed the one in a carrier. On closer examination, the arrows that had been shot into this bird looked more like heavy bolts, possibly and most likely coming from a handheld crossbow. By this time, Rob was now confident that good fortune was on our side. The other duck could not be far away, and on into the rapidly approaching dusk he went to find the little fellow. After a long, hopeful walk around the grassy bank, Rob spotted the second abused bird. This poor soul had not gotten off so easily. He had been shot at least 3 times, as there were 3 arrow bolts in his neck and upper shoulders. Remarkably, he too was still alert and agile. He was, in fact, so agile and so intent on not being helped that he would have no part in our plans to save his life. As Rob approached once again with net in hand to carry out his good deed, the beautiful brown and dark green bird, accompanied by his friends, gracefully slipped into the safety of the dark water. How often do we assume that humans alone show compassion to one another, help one another when sick, injured, or in trouble? And yet here on this pond were 2 ducks with 2 very important things in common. They had been assaulted and were in need of help. Someone had come along and either tried to kill them or simply found so-called sport in using them for target practice. No one knows how long they sat and swam and did their best to eat, with these arrow bolts piercing their heads and necks. They had come to know this pond as home, this pond where they lived with their companions, their loyal companions, who knew that they were in trouble, but would not leave them alone to suffer and die, who instead kept constant company with them. When the evasive green and brown bird used the pond as his only escape route, he was never alone. There by his side were his buddies, watching, swimming, staying close, even with the imminent threat of being captured by a member of the very species that had harmed them. Still, they would not leave their fellows. After several valiant but failed attempts, Rob decided to come back and try another day. For the remainder of this night, the ducks would once again have their peace and quiet, their time to be together, to swim quietly under the crescent moon, to groom and preen their soft, dense feathers, to bury their heads under their wings and find the peacefulness of a good night's sleep. For one more night, the injured bird would be accepted into the clutch of his dozing friends, not realizing that this would be his last evening in their company. The following afternoon, Rob was once again at the pond, and once again the agile duck was ready to do all in his power to avoid being captured. As the evening wore on, our feathered friends decided to bed down along the grassy banks, not quite so near the water as before. It was growing darker by the minute, but not being one to give up easily, Rob persevered in his pursuit of the determined bird. A slow, quiet, and steady approach with a well-focused lunge seemed the only way to assure success. In a flurry of feathers and frightened squawking, the poor traumatized birds scattered for their lives, never knowing that this persistent human was not out to harm them. Somehow, in all the darkness and chaos of attempted flight, Rob had managed to perfectly position his net so that the targeted duck was now captured and safely in a carrier. Once at our clinic, all the horrible arrows and bolts were removed. The ducks who would not give up their lives to this cruelty were cared for, and in only a few weeks they were recovering beautifully, though not completely, and were ready to go outside in our duck and chicken yard. Today, these beautiful birds go about their days swimming in the wading pools, visiting with their new companions, staying close to one another, quacking and eating and carrying on as they were never used as targets. We connect goes on in this intelligent minds who are so horribly treated, but we can trust by what we see here at Wildlife Rescue every day that they are strong and brave and seem to accept gallantly the fact that we clumsy and all too often cruel humans are their neighbors. It seems to me that these incredible creatures we all call animals have a depth of understanding that I can only hope to achieve, and a sensitivity that I've always found inspiring. If one day we humans learn to share in the peace these animals most surely feel, then we will no longer live in a world where ducks must dodge arrows and wonder if the approaching human is friend or foe. So that is tonight's story. What I said in there about the ducks making a near full recovery, the problem was that though they did really well, their nervous system had been damaged and they were a bit crooked in their ability to get about and a bit crooked in their ability to swim. They did stay with us for that reason, because our concern was that on a larger pond, then they might have really gotten into serious trouble again. And that was why we kept them. Fortunately, there were two of them so that their bond with each other stayed intact. Does anybody have any comments or questions for me this evening? Well, these being domesticated ducks and birds in general live quite a long time, for a dozen plus years sometimes. Yeah, when they have something like this that happens that can threaten their longevity as well, because a lot of internal damage can be quite permanent, especially with their nervous system, as I mentioned, then usually their lives are cut a little bit shorter. They did. That's again one of the remarkable things about animals is they tend to leave these tragedies behind them instead of holding on to them and being angry or doubtful or apprehensive. And again, there were two of them, so that really did help that they had each other as they made friends with the birds who were at our sanctuary. Well, it was tricky. Our vet, we had to, of course, anesthetize them. We did not know. The x-rays pretty much guided us as to where the bolts were, so that we knew that when we took them out, it was not going to be a problem. They weren't going to bleed to death or something of that nature because they had lodged in muscle, but they were, in a couple of cases, very near the brain, which was scary. So they simply were surgically removed. we had to make it a large area where the hole was and just very slowly extract them one at a time. And then we had to make sure that the wounds didn't close up too quickly, because of course that can cause infection and abscesses. So it was touch and go. These types of things are always touch and go for a while. That's why we are always so relieved and gratified when things are this bad for an animal, or in this case 2 animals, and yet somehow they survive and then do okay. Oh, good Lord. Let's see. Animals still coming in. We've taken in, as y'all have heard me say repeatedly and written repeatedly, we have taken in over 10,000 animals this year. More animals are coming in, anywhere from 10 to 20 a day. A lot of animals are getting released now because it's that time of year, the ones who've been with us for several months now. What else is new at the sanctuary? Gosh. We've got some projects going on for some of the permanent residents. We're working to enlarge some of the enclosures, put more interesting, enrichment items. Y'all will see things where we're always asking for help with enrichment items. We had a good food drive that y'all were greatly responsible for making such a great success. We've just got a lot going on all the time because there's always a lot of animals to care for. So, thank you for being a part of it, and thank you for making everything we do possible, because there's always animals who need us, and we absolutely will always be there for them. Thanks to y'all and your help.